Afternoon, everybody. Welcome back after a hard-working week in the ridings. We're all pleased to be back here and start our first study of the session. As everybody knows, we're going to be talking about the forest industry, and we have, to kick us off, officials from the Department of Natural Resources, who I spoke to before the meeting started and told them that they have to set the tone for the whole meeting, so they're feeling a great deal of pressure. We have Beth McNeil, who's the Assistant Deputy Minister from Canadian Forest Service, and Jeff Waring, who's the Director General Economics and Industry Branch, Canadian Forestry Service. So thank you both very much for coming. There's no need to explain to you how the committees work, because you know full well. I will remind everybody that we are televised today, so be on your best behavior. And on that note, I will turn the floor over to you, Ms. McNeil. I believe you're going to start us off. Thank you.
That's correct. Thank you. As the head of Canada's, Natural Resource Canada's Canadian Forest Service, it's a privilege to be here today to engage with you on the state of play of Canada's forest sector, the challenges and the opportunities. Thank you for the invitation. Comme les membres du comité le savent peut-être déjà, les forêts et le secteur forestier jouent un rôle important pour notre économie.
As committee members may know, forests and the forest sector play an important role in our economy for the benefit of our environment, the well-being of Canadians, and our future.
Dollars comprising 6% of Canada's exports and supporting more than 210,000 jobs and 300 rural communities. The forest sector is an important economic driver coast to coast. It is also one of Canada's largest employers of Indigenous people, with more than 11,000 employed in the sector. And we are working to improve the recruitment, retention, and development of women, a greater number of Indigenous people, and new Canadians along the full value chain. I'd like to share with you key factors influencing the sector across Canada today, and why many view the sector to be at a crossroads. Among the factors that cumulatively are having an impact on the competitiveness of the sector are trade disputes, decrease in forest fiber due to increased disturbances such as wildland fire and pests associated with a changing climate, the desire to conserve spaces and species to protect Canada's biological diversity, infrastructure capacity to get our products to market, and at times questioning of Canada's environmental reputation when we are a world leader in the sustainable management of our forests. La conséquence d'une ou plusieurs.
Due to one or more of these factors, we've seen both permanent and temporary closures of mills across Canada, in British Columbia, in Quebec, in New Brunswick, Newfoundland, and Nova Scotia. Dramatic results infecting thousands of workers along the value chain. More recently, we've seen the impact on the sector from the rail blockades, and we're monitoring potential impacts from COVID-19.
Dealing with the growing trend towards protectionism, particularly from Canada's single largest market, the United States. While Canada successfully resolved one trade dispute with China on dissolving pulp and two with the U.S. on supercalendered paper and uncoated groundwood paper, U.S. import duties on Canadian softwood lumber remain in place. These tariffs greatly affect the competitiveness of lumber producers, constraining their operations. And due to the integrated nature of the forest sector, the impact of these tariffs trickles down to pulp and paper producers and other users of sawmilling residues like wood chips. Plus récemment, l'Inde a démarré une enquête.
More recently, India has launched an investigation on Canadian newsprint, which could result in the imposition of the customs duties. These duties could have a significant impact, as producers are already dealing with a declining market.
The forest sector is at a crossroads. While in some regions of the country, traditional forest sector activities and products may not be possible at the scale they once were new opportunities exist for Canada to emerge as a world leader in the area of the circular bioeconomy, using forestry and derived products as nature-based solutions to many of the challenges we are facing today. For example, there is no solution to climate change without forests. Canada's leadership role in the sustainable management of our forests can carry over to being a leader in the transition to a low-carbon economy and the circular bioeconomy. At Natural Resources Canada, we have significant scientific programming, collaborating with provinces and territories in areas such as sustainable forest management, wildland fire, forest pests, including research on the mountain pine beetle and spruce budworm. We look forward to operationalizing the government's commitment to plant 2 billion trees as a means to increase carbon sequestration and provide other environmental benefits, such as water conservation and wildlife habitat. Nous avons également des programmes industriels qui ont plusieurs bénéfices.
We also have industry programming with multiple benefits, including advancing forest sector competitiveness, supporting Indigenous economic development, and advancing nature-based solutions through innovative uses of wood and wood fiber.
Our scientific knowledge, industry intelligence, programming, and partnerships to support players in the sector to diversify both markets and products and produce higher value bioproducts. Bioproducts, biochemicals, and bioenergy can replace traditional products and reduce demand for fossil fuel-based and non-renewable materials such as plastic, cement, and steel. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development estimates the market opportunities of the circular bioeconomy to be worth between $150 and $240 billion in 2030. In 2017, federal, provincial, territorial ministers responsible for forests recognized the importance of Canada's forest to the bioeconomy and endorsed the forest sector bioeconomy framework. Canada can be a global leader in this area. Currently, NRCan is looking to support initiatives using fiber residue to produce 100% compostable bioproducts. These products would be thrown in your compost bin, not your blue box. I'd like to share with you a few concrete examples of how the Canadian forest sector offers real solutions. We have built great tall wood buildings in recent years, like Brock Commons, an 18-story new student residence at UBC. This building is not only an engineering and architectural showpiece, until recently it was the tallest wood building in the world, and it is also an environmental game changer. Constructed in 9.5 weeks, it stores close to 1,600 metric tons of carbon dioxide and saved more than 1,000 metric tons in greenhouse gas emissions. This is equal to taking 500 cars off the road for a year. Un autre exemple est l'édifice d'origine, une tour.
Another example is the Origine building, a 13-story wood tower in Quebec City's Pointe-aux-Lèvres eco-district, which is the tallest wood-constructed condominium in North America.
Our Indigenous Forestry Initiative and off-diesel programs, remote communities converting their diesel-based heating system to biomass. For instance, the Quadacha First Nation in central BC is converting mountain pine beetle killed timber into fuel for a community bioenergy plant. Ouje, Bougamou, Cree First Nation in Quebec is renovating their biomass heating system to improve the efficiency and reliability for their district heating system. While workers, communities, and firms are experiencing the most serious of consequences in job loss and mill closures, there is an opportunity for the federal and provincial territorial governments to work together, transitioning the sector to be a real player in the circular bioeconomy, supporting workers and making our forest-dependent communities more resilient. The Government of Canada and provincial governments continue to work together with forest sector stakeholders to ensure support measures for workers, communities, and industry are aligned, fully utilized, and that gaps are identified and bridged. In closing, while the sector faces numerous challenges with significant cumulative effects, the sector also faces numerous opportunities. And Canada has the fiber, the environmental reputation, and the ingenuity to be one of the most competitive forest sectors in the world and a leader in nature-based solutions and the emerging circular bioeconomy. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Ms. McNeil. Mr. Melillo, I believe you're going to start us off.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses for being here today to answer our questions as we start this important study. I guess I'd just like to start with something that I think is in all of our minds right now, and that's the recent rail blockades that we've been seeing across the country. Could you just provide some information on the economic impact that that's had for the sector?
Yes, you're right. We were tracking this on a daily basis, the impact on each of our natural resource sectors, working closely with Forest Products Association of Canada. I'll ask Jeff if he can speak to the dollar amount, but there was a significant financial impact to some of our mills, both pulp and paper mills and lumber yards across the country.
Yeah, just in terms of the impact to the mills themselves, there was one mill that ended up shutting down in Quebec in one of the Resolute companies. In addition, what we heard was a number of anecdotal pieces of information from mills indicating that when the trains were coming up, there weren't any empty cars that were available to them. This was creating a concern in terms of inventory. They need to be able to move their inventory in order to be able to make use of it. And so there was other examples such as that, but it was only the one mill that we're aware of that ended up having to curtail temporarily. Okay, and so you can't really put a dollar figure on it at this point. Is that correct in saying? Not at this point. No. Okay. Yeah. In terms of data, as I understand, that some of the most recent data is from 2017 in the Natural Resources Canada for the forest sector. But economic circumstances have been changing, whether it's with softwood disputes or many different factors, and I've seen that in my own writing with the closure of Kenora Forest Products. I was just wondering if you have any more recent data, particularly for mill closures.
We track on a daily, weekly basis at NRCan with our network across the country. I don't have the stats in front of me, but we have, I believe, 6 or 7 mill closures in British Columbia affecting approximately 10,500 employees. Northern Pulp in Nova Scotia, there will be a significant impact along the integrated value chain there. We can certainly get back to the committee with the details of all the mills, both temporary and permanent curtailments that have occurred coast to coast.
I think that'd be great if we could get the committee to understand that and have that in front of them. And if I could just sort of ask a follow-up to that, do you have any information, again, maybe not in front of you, but in terms of gross domestic product and with the exports specifically?
The latest information that we have on GDP and export is from 2018, so it is still a bit dated. And what we do is we update this information on an annual basis. So this year for 2020, we'll be looking to update the information for 2019. So for 2018, though, gross domestic product came in at $25.8 billion in GDP. In terms of exports, there was $33 billion in exports, which represents about 6% of Canada's total exports capacity.
Okay. Thank you. I'll change gears slightly here just to something that I've been hearing a lot in my writing and meetings with different stakeholders, and that is the government's current plan to prohibit development of 25% of Canada's land by 2025. And I've previously asked the Minister of Natural Resources if he could confirm whether or not this plan is going to impact areas that are accessible for forest harvest, but unfortunately I wasn't able to get an answer, so I will ask if it's possible if you can confirm that.
As you know, the mandate letter commitment belongs to Minister Wilkinson of Environment and Climate Change Canada, so I would leave it to my colleagues at Environment and Climate Change Canada to appear to answer the question as to how they'll roll out the implementation plan to achieve 25% protected areas by 2025.
Okay, but is NRCan doing any economic analysis on any of those proposed lands at this point?
I would say a good example of that is the work we've done both on protected spaces and species in British Columbia. Because we have the industry intelligence and the relationship with the industry in all parts of the country, our economic analysis division really works hand in glove with Environment and Climate Change Canada to get a very good assessment on what impacts will be on the sector at the worker, community, and industry level when something is proposed.
Okay, thank you. Is that information that would also be able to be shared with the committee members?
Not at this time.
Okay. 1 minute. I'll stick with the trees and with the environmental sort of theme I have here, and that's with the 2 billion tree promise. And one question we've been hearing very often is if there's been an analysis on if any of these trees will be included in the allowable cut.
That's a good question. As you know, first of all, we're doing our own analysis on what it would take to operationalize 2 billion trees. It is incremental, so over and above the existing forest cover that exists in Canada today. I would say that Canada is a world leader in the sustainable management of our forest. And if it happens to be in areas, for instance, that have been disturbed by wildland fire or pests such as a mountain pine beetle, that does qualify as incremental. Because in Canada, if you cut a tree, if you harvest a tree, you have to replace it, but not if it's destroyed by insects or by fire. So in 60 or 70 years down the road, there may be a harvesting and a renewal by law of that tree that was cut.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Weiler?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you both, Ms. McNeil and Mr. Waring, for coming to speak to our committee today. As a member of Parliament from British Columbia that has a significant forestry sector in their riding, including a mill, the challenges facing the sector are definitely top of mind for my constituents. And I know many of the co-indicated ministers have been in regular contact with their provincial counterparts, so including Minister Wilkinson, Minister Ng, Minister Qualtrough, and Minister O'Regan. And I was wondering if you could share with the committee what efforts are being made at your level to keep the lines of communications open with their provincial jurisdictions and that are seeing challenges in the sector. And specifically, I was hoping you could speak a little bit towards the specific challenges that are facing the coastal forestry sector in BC.
Sure. Mr. Chair, at my level, what I did beginning in January was I struck a committee at the Assistant Deputy Minister level, and I have both federal participants and provincial counterparts on that committee. The scope of the work is to identify what currently exists in federal and provincial programming, again through the lens of worker, community, and industry, the firm, and where there may be gaps. So that work is underway now. We have a prioritized list. We have a list of gaps, and it's going to be prioritized by our provincial counterparts. And we'll be making a progress report to Ministers Donaldson of British Columbia and Minister O'Regan in early April. As for the coastal revitalization strategy, I know that first of all, the strike that was quite prolonged on the BC coast is over. It has ended. And the coastal revitalization strategy of the BC government is underway now.
Great, thank you. And with several First Nations in my riding that are closely involved in the forestry sector, I know the Indigenous Forestry Initiative is a unique funding stream offered by NRCan. And I was wondering if you could speak more to some of the outcomes about it, particularly just about the program, its uptake, and interest by Indigenous communities, and if you could provide some examples of some of the transformations that have been made as a result of this program.
Yep.
Sure, I'd be pleased to speak to the Indigenous Forestry Initiative. The Indigenous Forestry Initiative was renewed in 2017 for $10 million. This was a big shift from its predecessor. This allowed for much larger scale investments and partnerships with Indigenous communities. Since then, we've signed and gone into partnership on about 60 different contribution agreements with Indigenous communities, and other players in this space. These are resulting in significant investments in training and capacity development, which is enabling these forest communities to be able to take better advantage of the forest that's around them and to participate directly in value chains that exist as well as in the forest sector within their area.
Well, thank you. And one of the things that was mentioned in the opening earlier was some of the solutions that forest products could provide for as alternatives to single-use plastics. And this is something that's definitely of top of mind in my riding that has a huge coastal area. So I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit more to some of those opportunities and how they might be some alternatives for those products.
So right now, I'm told when I speak to those folks at FP Innovations that are doing research in this area, you currently have about 30 to 40% forest fiber in a plastic. We issued a challenge, and we haven't announced the winner and the next steps yet. However, I mentioned that there is, and I have it in my office, 100% biocompostable bottle, and we would like to be in a position to support the individuals and the firms behind this in a pilot plant. So I would say stay tuned.
That's great. No, that's very exciting. And I remember back in the Beijing Olympics, the Coca-Cola came out with their plant-based bottle, and so it'd be great to see some of the new opportunities that are going to be arising as a result of that. And given some of the challenges of the forestry sector, I think it is really important that we're looking at some new markets for our forest products. So I was hoping you could just speak a little bit more to some of the work that FP Innovations is doing. Whether that's finding new ways for wood to be used as a building product or otherwise.
Thank you for the question. So FP Innovations has been a long-standing partner to the industry, to the provinces, as well as to the federal government. They've been and they continue to undertake a lot of innovative work on the use of timber, of mass timber in construction. And this is allowing, for the advancement of the National Building Code to be able to build mass timber buildings above 6 stories. In addition to that, as Beth had already mentioned, FP Innovations is doing a lot of work, a lot of research and development around bioplastics, but also biocomposites. And this is the ability to take wood products and to be able to use them in automobiles, as an example, or in the aviation industry. In addition, they're also doing work around biofuels too. So again, using wood fiber as a substitute in fuels.
Great. Right on time. Thank you. Mr. Simard.
Merci beaucoup. J'ai apprécié, Madame McNeil, votre intervention.
Thank you very much. I'd appreciate your presentation. I come from one of those major forestry areas in Quebec, Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. And we've just had a plant that's closed down its operations. Part of my campaign, of course, was based on that. It might seem quite transparent, but you did make a statement. We find ourselves at a crossroads in your. Now, if my wife would say we are at a crossroads, I'd be scared quite a bit. I would have to react very quickly. So I don't know if you'll agree with me, but I believe that this action over the last 20 years, the government has not done it. There are 3 fronts of interest. The commercial trade disputes, which have not been fought by the federal government over the last few years, and the other arena of activity is research and development. Cellulose and its various pulps, I'm told that it's even better than sliced bread, and eventually will replace a lot of composite materials, whether it's in plastics or with paints or. But the sector has never received any financial support, significant financial on behalf of the federal government. During my electoral campaigning, I kept seeing this picture in my mind, because since the 1970s to the end of the 2000s, collectively, we have invested $70 billion in the oil sands. We didn't have the technology initially, but we developed that technology. I don't want to twist a knife in the wound, but they won that fight. Now we're facing a climatic change crisis, and many specialists are telling us that the forest industry is probably one of the best assets we have in this fight. I'm sorry for the long preamble here, but my question now. Would you agree with me to say that over the last 20 years, what's occurred for the support and research and development by the federal government perhaps hadn't been to our expectations? I know, long question, long preamble. Not at all. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to respond to this question as to the investments, federal government support, particularly in the forestry area. Budget 2019 announced investments of $251 million. And in 2018,
was $100 million ring-fenced in the federal government's Strategic Innovation Fund for innovation in the forest sector. And in 2019, there was also an investment in natural resources and emergency response, and we benefited in the forest sector with the investment of $38.5 million in our wildland fire program at Natural Resources Canada. So those are three key investments made by the federal government announced in the last 18 months or so, that I believe will support the expansion of markets, the transition to a low-carbon economy, and greater participation of Indigenous people in the economic development of their communities as it pertains to forestry.
Bon, je vous suis bien. On a peut-être.
okay, I perhaps don't have the same enthusiasm as you do, but I understand where you're coming from. Now, research and development, that's we've covered that, if you will, but the trade wars that are going on, particularly with the American market, to your understanding, let me put it this way. When I go to Europe, particularly in France, I see all sorts of these infrastructure projects. They're based on wood, and they don't have the natural resources themselves. They don't produce that wood in France. But you see all sorts of buildings, bridges particularly, and other buildings, government buildings, residential buildings that are based on wood product. How is it that in Canada, where we have an abundance of this resource, we have not yet really developed the culture to accompany its use? Engineered wood products are still reluctantly accepted in Canada. Is there perhaps a cement lobby that is kind of impeding the advancement of the wood lobby? Again, through you, Mr. Chairman, thanks for the question.
Facts, I would say. First, with regard to infrastructure and building with wood, we do have, and we did announce a call for proposals last year for innovative wood bridges, and through our Green Construction Through Wood program. The other thing that's very important this year is that Canada will be announcing a change in the national building codes up to 12 stories. This will be very significant. And with the product and market diversification, particularly the engineered products, we view this as part of the solution to advance Canada's climate change goals, achieving the target, the Paris target, because we know that long-lived wood products help sequester carbon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Canning's you're next, and that was probably a good segue for you.
J'ai le temps pour une petite, non?
You're already over, sorry.
Hesitate to press it. Oh, too hard. Okay, thank you, and thank you for coming here today. And Monsieur Simard stole my first question, but I'll try to rephrase it, and that is about the innovations in wood products, and particularly mass timber engineered wood. I was just at a forestry summit meeting in British Columbia 2 Fridays ago, where one of the anecdotes was of a Swedish company, Stora Enso, which now 70% of its revenue, it's a forestry company, 70% of its revenue comes from products it didn't make 10 years ago. And I believe that, the mass timber innovations are one of Canada's biggest opportunities for this, not only for the opportunities to store carbon and do good for the climate, but also provide a real domestic market for our forest products that would insulate us from, India putting tariffs on our paper, or the Americans' tariffs on our lumber. And I'm just to follow up on what Monsieur Simard said, I had a private member's bill that asked the government to basically, in so many words, do more government procurement with regard to building with wood. I mean, you mentioned wood bridges, but wood buildings, has that happened? Because I was told it was happening from Public Works last year. And can you provide any information on that? Because these companies like Structure Lamb in Penticton and Kolesnikov in Castlegar is building a huge plant. They need that government lead to make their efforts worthwhile. And they're already leaders in the field, but they want to stay there.
Thank you. Did you want to?
Thank you for the question. I don't have the latest information on what Public Works and Procurement Services is doing, so I would refer the answer to them. However, there's a number of activities underway within the Canadian Forest Service where we're looking to work with industry as well as with a number of stakeholders to advance wood construction using mass timber, including working on education. So working with architects, with engineers, with designers to ensure that they understand the benefits of working with wood in large construction, as well as the program that Beth had mentioned, the Green Construction with Wood program. There's been a number of different calls for proposals, and a number of different buildings will be built with the assistance of this program. Lastly, we've been working with FP Innovations, and they recently released the CLT, the Cross-Laminated Timber Handbook, just last week. So this is a very thick handbook that is a useful tool for builders, designers, and engineers to be able to recognize the advantages of the engineered wood products to be able to use them.
Thank you for that. And sort of on the flip side of that, a lot of people in British Columbia are concerned with the export of raw logs. And I've been hearing rumors that, on the coast, especially where there has been a strike, things are difficult, that those companies are pressuring the government to relax the restrictions on raw logs. So, I think the deal is, well, we'll get more jobs, we'll get some jobs in the woods, but we'll forget about the jobs in mills. And I'm just wondering about what the federal government's response to that, because I believe the federal government has to provide a permit for the export of raw logs on top of any provincial permits. And I'm just wondering if you have policies on that and if you're considering changing them under pressure from these companies.
So our colleagues at Global Affairs are responsible for export controls of raw logs from Crown lands. So they would be best positioned to respond to that question and to speak to how those efforts are harmonized with provincial practices that would take care of provincial lands.
What about private lands? Because a lot of Vancouver Island is private.
My understanding is that they would have to come through the federal process, through Global Affairs Canada.
Okay. going back to the 2 billion trees, I just wanted to ask Ms. McNeil about, you said that it would be incremental if the program planted trees in areas that had been deforested due to beetle infestations or fire. I mean, I go out into the woods a lot, and when I go to beetle impacted areas or forest fire areas, they're covered in little trees that are growing there naturally. And to me, that's not incremental. I think if you're going to count this for our climate action, it has to be incremental to what nature does. So I'm just wondering how you would defend that.
I would agree with you, Mr. Chair. The incremental is incremental to the existing forest cover through planting the trees, not through natural regeneration.
Okay. I mean, right now, there is some planting of trees that happens in those situations. BC, I know, is way behind in it. And so those areas get naturally regenerated, and, those trees contribute to sequestering carbon, but it's not something that we did.
No, correct. That, Mr. Chair, the plan is to operationalize the planting of 2 billion trees. When I mentioned the lands and the forested lands that has been destroyed by wildland fire or pests, those could be a source of land. We're looking for a land mass twice the size of Prince Edward Island. So if the regeneration is not adequate, those lands would qualify, and I've been working with the chief forester in BC to identify what more lands could be there.
Thank you. Mr. Genereux, you're next. 5 minutes.
Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais tout d'abord corriger mon collègue du Bloc.
I'd like to correct my colleague from the Bloc Québécois that the latest investments of the last 60 years in the oil sands did not benefit Quebec. That's rather incredible, Mr. Chair. Investment in the tar sands or the oil sands haven't benefited all Canadians, Quebec included. Thank you to the witnesses. I did have a meeting with the interests in the wood sector, Montmagny, Saint-Pamphile area, which is completely to the south of my area, and butt up against the American frontier or border. And some of the mills buy American wood in American dollars, and they have to pay a 20% tax with the exchange rate as well. They're doubly taxed as to the exports, which then go out. Are there any negotiations underway between Canada and the United States on these various taxes and duties that have been placed by the Americans on these products? I know perhaps some of these issues are before the courts, but is there still a negotiation going on in the background? We have cedar shakes that are being produced in this area, and it's also being taxed. And it wasn't in the former regime. So once again, we're suffering from these new taxes. Have there been any effort tried to reduce or eliminate these taxes? That would be my first question.
On to this question, I will have to defer to my Global Affairs Canada colleague that will appear at this committee on Wednesday afternoon to address what we're doing currently, and we are taking action currently on all exports and the status of the cedar shakes and shingles.
OK. L'autre question, c'est 2 milliards d'arbres.
2 billion trees, that's a very noble objective. Big number. I've been told that perhaps we are already planting approximately 2 billion trees a year in Canada. Is that true or not? Mr. Chairman, today throughout Canada, planting of trees, it consists of approximately 500 million, not in the billions. So 2 billion trees then, do they intend to plant these per year for a number of years, or is it 2 billion over a number of years?
10 years.
10 years. So we will plant less than we are already planting right now. Is it true, or?
Mr. Chair, ça c'est une augmentation.
No, it would be an
The 500 million that are planted every year. Okay, where are they going to be planted? How much going to cost? I'd like to have some in my writing.
Mr. Chair, we do know with our analysis that this would cover a landmass, as I mentioned, twice the size of Prince Edward Island. We have done estimates on what it would cost if we planted the small seedlings. It is on the order of billions of dollars. The announcement in the platform commitment did note that it would be cost shared, and we will be looking
By
at
whom?
planting right across Canada.
Shared by whom? With whom?
Mr. Chair, I'm meeting with stakeholders every week in my office, and I would say a top-tier partner are those partners that manage the forest, the provinces and the territories. There are other organizations such as Trees Canada, to name one, Nature Canada and others that are qualified. So we're looking at organizations that have a proven track record to purchase the seedlings, get the right stock for the ecozones, plant successfully, and monitor.
Okay, so si je comprends bien, ça va être fait avec le gouvernement du Québec.
So this will be conducted in partnership with the Quebec government and perhaps the regional governments. We have regional municipalities in Quebec. There are cooperatives, there are private organizations and agencies. So all of these are potential partners and might be admissible to plant trees and get some support.
Provincial governments, we will be working with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and others.
Thank you very much.
That's it?
That's it. Mr. Lefebvre.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Avant de commencer, donc...
Thanks again, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here. I represent Sudbury. It's a mining town, as you may know. I come from Kapuskasing, pulp and paper town. With Spruce Falls, my grandfather worked there. He helped to build that mill, that sawmill, in the 30s. And we'd export the paper, which was fabricated there, for the New York Times. We're quite proud of that. Major exports of paper. The whole family is a intergenerational thing. And I benefited from the good jobs that were created. I was able to go to university. I was able to pay my way because of the good jobs that were created there over the years. So perhaps following up a bit what Mr. Simard was saying, the lack of investments that he claims over the last 4 years, you've mentioned quite a few for the forestry area. If we take a look at the Softwood Action Plan, $900 million approximately, 250 more in the 2019 budget, another 5 million to 50 million in, it's about 2.5 million, a billion rather, in the sector. But we have to, of course, recognize that there are challenges, there are difficulties. And yes, we are at a crossroads. But what does that mean for the sector?
Alluded to that potential as to certainly when we look at bioproducts and that bioeconomy and the role that could play. Actually, I've seen that with my own eyes when I went to Chibougamau in Chapelle, actually, au Québec. And I've seen the investments there and what that has transformed. But we're also seeing that, there's all this potential that is out there in this, billion-dollar economy that is waiting to. So, and we're seeing this, it's this transition that is hard to do. So maybe in your expertise, both of you here, and the challenge for the adoption, right? Well, obviously, the FP Innovation is doing amazing work. There's tons of research going on. We're world leaders in Canada, but now adopting that in our commercial world, what do you think as the impediments to that adoption? What public policy could we be looking at to, as we provide with a report to the Parliament here, that we can maybe work towards and recommend to Parliament?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. When I speak with my colleagues in British Columbia at the provincial level, there is enough forest fiber within the forest. About 2/3 of that fiber has traditionally gone to the traditional saw log industry. So what we have to do federally is continue to support those smaller and large mills, small, medium, large, to purchase the equipment. It might be first in kind in Canada, perhaps have pilot plants to see that we can transition from using the residue to higher value bioproducts. As for public policy, as we know, the management of forests is under provincial and territorial jurisdiction, and BC is taking strides and many steps right now to encourage that transition with changes in legislation at the provincial level to support the transition of the bioeconomy.
Thank you. I know my colleague, Mr. Wheeler, talked about the Indigenous participation in the sector, its importance, it's growing. And Mr. Waring, you mentioned the new investments made by our government in the past, in the last mandate, and how that has changed and obviously benefited many communities. Actually, last week I had the honor of making an announcement with the Goki Corporation up in Arrowland area, and with Martin Falls as well as Yamatong. So there's 3 First Nations that benefited from this program. And we see that across the country. So you said there was around 50 communities that were able to, I know you threw some numbers that were pretty impressive. And how do we continue down that road? And obviously, if you can explain to us the benefits of that program.
Mr. Chair, the number of contribution agreements that we've signed under the recent Indigenous Forestry Initiative is 60, just over 60 contribution agreements with a number of different communities. Again, a lot of the benefits that we're realizing through these contribution agreements are one around training of individuals, of the community members, in order to best position them to be able to take those important jobs within the forest sector. We're also working with those Indigenous communities to ensure that they have the right skills to be able to negotiate new value chain opportunities with other key members in the forest sector, as well as with the provincial governments when they're discussing opportunities around managing forests within their communities.
Thank you. I'm going to have to stop you there.
That's it?
I'm sorry. That's it. Ms. McLeod.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. And I want to start. Your 2017 Softwood Lumber Action Plan had $605 million for loans and loan guarantees. Can you tell me how many companies took advantage of the opportunity, how much funding remains, and has there been analysis done in terms of how it was used? And if you don't have all that information, can you table it?
Mr. Chair, the Softwood Lumber Action Plan had allocated $867 million for support for workers as well as for businesses. In terms of the $600 million that was supported or provided through the Export Development Canada as well as the Business Development Canada, what we've indicated is that EDC and BDC have provided to date more than $560 million and $369 million of financial products and services, respectively. This is as of October 31st, 2019.
Can you give me an example of a typical project that they would have supported?
Mr. Chair, that question would like to be best answered by Export Development Canada or the Business Development Canada. Those investments and how they support forest companies are commercially sensitive, and so that would be best for them to provide that answer.
Okay, so I would have thought that perhaps. Are you recommending this program be renewed because it was through your jurisdiction? So you don't have a sense in terms of did it work? Did it make a difference? And I'm not asking for commercially sensitive information, but a general idea in terms of how the money was used would be, I think, helpful for the. So if you don't have it, perhaps we could send a letter to the organizations that were just identified, asking for generic information in terms of that loan program, and some, as I say, not commercially sensitive information. But I think, I mean, that's a lot of money, and I think it would be helpful for us to know if it had some benefit. So my next area that I'm interested in, and we have an example locally, you talked about the Indigenous communities, and so you have a huge opportunity. And I'll use an example. Of course, a mill closed down, and they were transferring their cut to another mill. And the challenge is of course, you can't you have to compensate. And certainly the First Nations communities are very interested in a portion of that cut that's been transferred to another mill. And BC now has some new legislation. But really, I think the bigger issue is the opportunity for the Indigenous communities, First Nations, to actually have an equity partnership in some of that cut. So have you got anything that supports those communities in terms of purchasing cut?
Our money and our programming doesn't go to purchase the timber. And I was speaking with BC's Chief Forester last Friday, where we can help, working hand in hand with BC. They can identify opportunities. She determines the annual allowable cut, but we have a couple of programs, not just the Indigenous Forestry Initiative, but I would also say our investment in forest industry transformation, where we can look at mills that have either closed or are about to close and see if we can develop new partnerships with the local communities, whether they be First Nation or not, or both.
Because I certainly perceive that that'll be a major barrier in terms of tenure transfers if there's no opportunity to become an equity partner. So my next question, and it's perhaps you can advise me, an example of a company that does a value-added product, which we of course would like to see. They sell their product into the States, and because it's value-added, they got captured in under codes 4407, 4409, export control list. So essentially, it's a value-added product who is paying astronomical duty, not the 20%. Their argument is they just got captured into the softwood lumber challenges. So have you identified, I understand that there's more than just this one company. Have you identified a number of examples throughout this country of people that have been caught up and are being challenged by the sort of categorization? So that's number one, and I think it's important.
You're not going to have time for number two. We're already over time, so let's get a quick answer to that. Thanks. And we'll move on. Thanks.
I will defer to my colleagues that will be here on Wednesday from Global Affairs Canada. But if you're speaking, Mr. Chair, if the question pertains to remanufacturers, yes, we have identified a number of firms across Canada that have been impacted.
Thank you. Ms. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you both for being here today. We appreciate the information that you're giving us. I come from the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, so I don't have to tell you we've lost our industry, 10, 12 years ago with the closure of 2 of our 3 pulp and paper mills. Because there was no market for byproduct, it affected many of our mill operations. And so we've seen massive closures all over the province. And unlike today, we didn't have innovation programs. There was no funding support that allowed for a transition in the industry. So I'm really happy to see that that is occurring today and that there is focus on innovation, on skilled training, and definitely on expanding market opportunities for product. And I know in the province where I am, there are regions like my riding in particular, which was heavily involved in forest industry product development that no longer has an industry, and what is still existing is very little. we haven't seen as much as a forest access road built in 15 years. So, it's unfortunate because there is still sustainable fiber content and an opportunity to look at new development within that industry. So I'm really happy to see the programs that are there. So my question is around those programs. One, with regard to the Forest Innovation Program, where I know we're investing $92 million over the next 3 years. And how is that program delivered? Is it delivered through provinces and territories? Is it directly by the federal government? And regions that want to look at new and innovative ways in developing forestry products or forest industry, how can they access those types of programs right now?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'll mention a couple of programs. First, the industry and the investment in forest industry transformation. There will be, upon the renewal, a call for proposals where individual firms will work with Natural Resource Canada and consultants. They will be reviewed by an external review panel. So the money does not go through the provinces. But I'll give you an example of something outside of our programming, but within the federal government, and that's ISED Strategic Innovation Fund. The Kruger Mill in Corner Brook, Newfoundland received, I believe it was $13.8 million to increase the efficiency of that mill and keep it operating in Corner Brook, Newfoundland. So they work directly with ISED, and firms across Atlantic Canada, across Canada, can work directly with us once the call for proposals is up and out.
So under a number of these programs, you mentioned the Forest Industry Transformation Program, the Expanding Market Opportunity Program, there's the Forest Innovation Program. Are all of those programs available now, or are they getting ready to be rolled out?
They're fully committed now. However, Budget 2019, Mr. Chair, announced the renewal at $251 million. We hope to be in a position in early April to announce a new call for proposals.
Okay. Also, I know from my colleagues at the table, and obviously from just listening to the news, that there are significant challenges within the industry today in British Columbia, in their particular province. Is there any other provinces that are affected in such a significant way in Canada or other regions, or is this more singular to what's happening in British Columbia right now?
So, Mr. Chair, in British Columbia, it really is seeing the impacts of several things with the wildland fire, mountain pine beetle trade disputes, and growing desire to protect both species and spaces. However, I would say with the closure of Northern Pulp in Nova Scotia, it has supported and took 92% of the sawmills that exist in that province. So with the closure of Northern Pulp, which happened January 2020, we're going to see significant suffering along the full value chain in the province of Nova Scotia.
Thanks. I'm going to have to stop you there, unfortunately. Mr. Smart, I can give you about 1 minute, but it's a firm 1 minute.
Je vais faire un aparté quand même assez rapide.
Well, a very brief intervention. I spoke very quickly. For Mr. Généreux, there's also that Dutch disease that exists, which, for Mr. Lefebvre, quite quickly, you spoke of 1.2 billion. I can tell you about a construction of a pipeline that's going to cost 12 billion, and the purchase, which is going to be 4 billion. So that's 18 billion right there. No comparison to be made there. However, on that tree planting issue, I don't know if you're aware that in Australia there is an initiative underway. It's almost like a stock market for carbon, if you will. You can plant these elsewhere, and we can do it in Quebec. We can do it in Canada. It's called the gardening of the forest, because there's reforestry, and there's
Pardon, pardon.
If you
Oui.
can answer.
Donc, je ne sais pas si vous avez déjà étudié cette.
They've committed to planting 1 billion trees. I don't know the details, but we certainly are looking at what best practices around the world.
Thank you. I apologize. My job as chief interrupter.
Votre réponse était mieux que ma question.
your answer was much better than my question.
To a good start. We were very, very grateful. We will suspend for 2 minutes, and I mean 2 minutes, and then we'll get going with the next witnesses. Thanks. Welcome back, everybody. I'm going to dispense with long introductions. Just welcome our next set of witnesses. We're very short on time this afternoon, so let's just jump right into the presentation, and we can get to the questions right off the bat. Thank you.
Bonjour tout le monde, and merci beaucoup pour l'occasion de participer.
Good afternoon, one and all. Thank you for allowing me to participate in this meeting.
Social Development Canada, and I work on skills and employment programming. I have with me colleagues Alan Bully from our Employment Program and Policy shop, as well as Katie Alexander from our Program Operations branch. So we're here today to discuss the forest sector, and as we've already heard in the earlier part of the session, the sector is a pillar of the Canadian economy, and it plays an important role in creating jobs and supporting local labor markets across the country. We've also heard that the sector is facing a number of challenges, which have resulted in some closures, production curtailment, and some layoffs as well. And as a result, workers and communities that depend on the sector for their livelihood are feeling the effects. In situations such as this, our department, ESDC, stands ready to provide essential services to workers, communities, and employers. These include supports such as local rapid response efforts through Service Canada, layoff prevention through the work sharing program, immediate assistance to displaced workers who are eligible for employment insurance Part 1 income benefits, training and reemployment transition supports that are offered by provinces and territories through the labour market transfer agreements with federal financial support, and other skills training and labour market resources available through our department. With your permission, I will provide some additional details on some of these initiatives. Also, as many of you are aware, and as we've heard already, there was a 2017 Softwood Lumber Action Plan, which included several measures through our department to support workers and employers affected by the U.S. duties on our softwood lumber products. These included additional investment in skills training and employment supports, as well as job loss mitigations through work sharing flexibilities. ESDC has a number of programs and services that are currently available and can be deployed quickly to all sectors of the economy, including in forestry. Service Canada actively monitors labour market conditions across the country, assesses potential local and regional employment effects, and engages in proactive outreach to stakeholders, including employers, labour organizations, and affected communities, to ensure that they're aware of the supports that are available to them. As an example, once we learn of a publicly announced layoff, Service Canada contacts affected employers within 48 hours to assess their needs and offer information sessions. These sessions are commonly delivered in partnership with provincial or territorial representatives, which allows affected employees to learn about both federal and provincial territorial programs and services that they might qualify for. I've also already mentioned the work sharing program. Work sharing helps employers and workers avoid layoffs when there is a temporary reduction in a normal level of business activity that is beyond the employer's control. Under work sharing, the Government of Canada provides income support to employees who are eligible for EI and who work a temporarily reduced work week while their employer recovers. This allows employers to retain skilled workers and avoid the process of recruiting and retraining. It also provides workers the opportunity to continue to be employed, retain their skills, and receive employment insurance during the days in which they are not working. In terms of income support, employment insurance regular benefit provide temporary income support to Canadians who have lost their jobs through no fault of their own, while they look for new work or upgrade their skills. The number of weeks of EI benefits that a person can receive is based on the unemployment rate in the region and the number of insurable hours, that they have accumulated, up to a maximum of 45 weeks. To support skills training and employment for Canadians, the Government of Canada provides provinces and territories with approximately $3 billion every year under the labour markets transfer agreements. These include the labour markets development agreements and the workforce development agreements. This funding enables provincial and territorial governments to offer a range of skills training and employment supports to help Canadians improve their skills, search for work, and keep good jobs. PTs have the flexibilities to design and deliver employment programming that meets the need of their local labour markets. In addition to the base funding of almost $3 billion a year through Budget 2017, the Government of Canada made significant additional investments of $2.7 billion over 6 years to enhance the labor market transfer agreements starting in 2017-2018. This included expanding eligibility for programs and services under the labor market development agreements to allow more individuals to receive employment insurance funded skills training and employment assistance. Under the workforce development agreements, provinces and territories have added flexibility to provide skills training and employment programming that meet the diverse needs of the clients, with a focus on those who are further removed from the labor market and those who want to upskill. I mentioned the Softwood Lumber Action Plan. The following ESDC measures were included in the plan to support affected workers and employers in the forest sector. $50 million over 2 years in additional targeted funding to jurisdictions under the labor market development agreements to enhance skills training and employment supports to affected forester workers. $30 million over 2 years was made available for provinces and territories to undertake research projects on targeted earnings supplements with complementary employment supports to ease employment transition for affected workers. In addition, temporary special measures were introduced under the Standard Work Sharing Program to support longer-term business viability and mitigate job loss. This included extending the duration of work-sharing agreements, waiving the mandatory cooling-off period between agreements, and providing employers with flexibility regarding the mandatory recovery plans that they must enter into under work-sharing. These special work-sharing measures remain available until the end of this month. These initiatives were designed to support workers in a sector that was forecast to be facing significant job losses and closures as a result of U.S. duties imposed at the time. However, as we saw, lumber prices remained quite high during the period, and the sector remained profitable. This meant that demand for the additional resources that was made available under the Softwood Lumber Action Plan was limited. Only some provinces chose to take up the additional resources that were made available for training and employment supports, and there was limited take-up of work-sharing opportunities. Later on, given the integrated nature of the forest sector, eligibility for the workforce adjustment measures under the Softwood Lumber Action Plan was broadened to include workers affected by any trade dispute in the forest sector, not only softwood. This meant that in the second year of the funding, it was available to all jurisdictions. 5 provinces accessed the funding in the second year. These included BC, Saskatchewan, Ontario, Quebec, and Prince Edward Island. This meant that provinces accessed nearly $40 million in additional targeted funding, enabled them to provide skills training and employment supports to affected workers in forestry. In addition to these programs, our department engages regularly with colleagues in other federal departments, including NRCan, who have responsibilities for the forestry sector. We are in regular contact with provinces and territories to understand their local labor market needs and consider how the supports that we provide them can be used to meet those needs. And we engage regularly with other stakeholders, including labor, business, and communities that have an interest in the forest sector. This allows us to understand their needs and consider how our programs can best support them. Thank you for your attention. I and my colleagues will be happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much. Ms. McLeod, you first.
Thank you. And you alluded to this a little bit in your comments, but I find it a little bit absurd in terms of funding that was provided to the Labor Market Development Agreement. It was to workers affected in the ongoing softwood lumber dispute. And, you know, I understand it went to all the provinces. PEI, which was not impacted, Nunavut, which was not impacted. So what we had was a lot of provinces receiving dollars, and they were not impacted by this particular trade issue or the forestry sector. So how is that consistent with what the mandate of the program was?
Thank you for your question. The money was made available. It wasn't actually allocated. In other words, it wasn't automatically downloaded to provinces and territories. The money was made available. So there were a number of provinces and territories that chose not to do that. And the reason why it's done like that, because I'm trying to anticipate what I think might be your next question. Why would you do that like that?
Well, why would PEI have the right to apply to a program? It's not that I don't love Prince Edward Island, but clearly they weren't impacted. And so how could they apply and get money for that program when it wasn't the purpose of the program?
It has to do with the connection with the program and the labor market development agreements. The two large agreements that my colleague spoke to you about both contain a clause called the Equality of Treatment Clause. And what it means is, as money is flowed to provinces and territories, that should any other jurisdiction see something that might be advantageous to them, they have the opportunity to apply for it. So as we design allocation models for anything that is connected with the Workforce Development Agreement or with the Labor Market Development Agreement, we do design the allocation in such a way that should a province or territory see that as being advantageous, they could apply for it. At the same time, however, the allocations were designed in such a way that those provinces and territories, or provinces largely, that were most immediately affected had the lion's share of the allocation. There was a floor made available for smaller jurisdictions.
Thank you. And of course, I think from anyone on the outside saying there's special money for, provinces impacted by the softwood lumber dispute and money went to other provinces, it really doesn't sort of sit all that well, but it's sort of a bit of an unusual system. So I'll go on to my next. Within this crisis that we're having in the forestry industry, and certainly I would consider myself to be representing a riding that is impacted. Kamloops is a major center, and you go 1.5 hours up one highway and the mill closed, and you go 1.5 hours up the other highway and the mill closed, both leaving a couple of hundred people out of work. They just happen. I mean, there's nothing really that different about these two communities. They're rural communities. Their closest center is Kamloops, and they're in different regions. So there's different hours that are available and different hours that you need to be eligible for the EI program. So did your department look at these issues during this current crisis in British Columbia? Because, a map that just happens to draw a line and exclude one, have a really different playing field for really what was equivalent circumstances.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. The EI program is a national program that seeks to provide temporary income support to people when they lose their jobs. The program is operated nationally through a system of 62 regions, and the member asked specifically about 2 of those regions. Regions are selected in order to ensure that people who live in them face roughly similar labor market conditions. Because EI is a legislative program and is statutorily determined, it's very, very difficult to change those parameters on the fly. And so the EI region system allows the labor market conditions to affect the eligibility of people who live in those regions. Totally understand and accept that this can lead to situations such as are described by the member, where people living in relatively close proximity to each other face different treatment. This is the same situation would apply no matter where you chose to draw the line. I can tell you that the EI region are reviewed every 5 years to ensure that they continue to represent a relatively homogeneous labor market conditions, and the current study is expected to be concluded by the end of this year.
Thank you. So I think one has Kamloops in and one has Kamloops out, and so a very sort of unfair circumstances. My next question is the early retirement option that was made available, was that money transferred directly to the provinces for them to determine the criteria around early retirement, or is that something that your department does?
That particular initiative was implemented by the province. It did not involve any federal funding. Generally speaking, the federal government has not chosen to introduce any kind of early retirement programs.
Okay. My next question is I understand severance is, EI has taken off severance, but your work during, or your severance, the 6 months or 4 months or 5 months, whatever your severance period is although EI has taken off, it's not considered work hours for the purposes of EI. Is that correct?
I'm not sure of that, but I will endeavor to get to the answer to that question.
Okay.
Thanks. I'm going to have to stop you there. You're right on time. Perfect.
I have
Mr. May.
another question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, thank you all for being here to help us kick off this this study. We've heard a lot today about threats and opportunities for the forestry industry specifically, but not as much on the human resource side. So I'm going to focus my questions really there, if that's okay. I may have misheard you in your introduction, but specifically around the program around WorkShare. I think you used the word it had limited uptake. Did I hear that correctly?
Am I on? Yes, thank you. Yes, we did have two employers benefit from the special measures under the forestry, one in BC and one in Alberta, representing a total of 83 employees, averting 32 layoffs. The cost of work sharing was approximately $100,000, and the cost of layoffs was $719,000.
So I guess it begs the question. Why such a limited response to what clearly is a very good program for at least those two companies that applied? Were there companies that wanted to participate in the program and for whatever reason, whatever barrier was in place, couldn't? Is there some issues that we need to address to maybe get that number up?
I can start and then maybe my colleague can add. So overall, there's been quite a bit of support to the forestry sector as it relates to work sharing. It's the specific sort of access to the special measures that has been limited. So since April 2016, just up until March 2020, a total of 31 agreements nationally have been signed, representing the aversion of about 1,700 layoffs. So the way that the special measures are built is really that an employer applies for their 26-week agreement, then they have to apply for a 12-week extension, and then the 38 weeks is where the special measures kicks in. So we have many employers who are benefiting from work sharing in the forestry sector, but only a few that have actually needed to access that second 38-week extension.
I see. And so how many companies are participating then? Could you make a
So a total, we have funded a total of 31.
31, sorry.
Yeah, nationally, since April 2016.
And you mentioned a dollar figure, but do you know what what that would equate in terms of number of hours that were shared?
I don't have that available.
Okay.
We can endeavor to get that for sure.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to ask quickly about the sector itself in terms of the demographics within the sector. We see that it's a number of different industries, an aging workforce. Do you know what the average age right now is for the workers in the forestry industry?
I don't have that information, unfortunately, but we can try to get that for you.
Has there been any discussion about that as a problem as the baby boomers fully retire? Is there a threat there that we simply aren't going to have the bodies to manage the industry?
So that's certainly something that we monitor, not just with respect to this particular sector. This is an issue that affects the economy as a whole. I think the typical profile of a worker in the natural resource sector, excluding perhaps oil and gas, does tend to be somewhat older, mostly male-dominated. Some of the measures around training and support that were introduced specifically with that in mind, because we recognize that some of this population that's being impacted does not necessarily have a lot of formal skills, but probably do have other skills that they've acquired through the life that can be very useful in some other sectors where there are greater opportunities.
Okay. And you'd mentioned there an issue that being predominantly a male-focused industry. Is there any measures in place right now to affect that in any way?
We do not have any programs specifically targeting this sector that have a gender component to them. However, nothing prevents the sector from, or any company in the sector that is looking to change the profile of its workers from coming to see us, and we would be happy to discuss their needs and consider how we might be able to help.
Okay, I only have about a minute and a half, and I do have a question about training. When training is funded through either the federal or provincial sources, what's the training that's being taken up the most by the most employees at this point?
the way that the provinces and territories report on the training that they do, it's broken down, especially under the labour market development agreements, it's broken down under a number of broad categories that were put in place when the federal government initially delivered skills training. But the largest component is simply listed as skills development. So it could be a very broad range of industry-specific training. It could also reach into something like literacy and essential skills, or over a broad, very, very broad range of skills development. So breaking that down individually is not something that I could do for you right at the moment, but it is generally quite broad in the way that provinces and territories report that back to us.
Just very quickly, we've talked a lot about innovation in this sector today. Is there anything that's coming that isn't there right now that is going to be needed in terms of skill set for this industry?
I don't have anything specifically on that. The largest share of what happens in terms of skills development takes place at the provincial and territorial level. We provide the funding, and they make the determination themselves about what's best required for their own jurisdiction and their own specific labour markets.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. May. Mr. Simard.
Merci.
Thank you. I've been listening to your presentation quite attentively, and I can state that the major crisis that we're going through in softwood lumber and in lumber, I'm talking for my region primarily, very high kill rate, as it were. Many people have lost their jobs, particularly just pre-retirement age. They've spent their entire careers in the forest, and from one day to the next to try to find another employment is very, very difficult. So we do require these transitional measures. I would agree entirely with what you have stated, but contrary to what my Conservative colleagues might say, I see no problem in applying this to other sectors than forestry. I kind of find it difficult to understand how these programs that we talked about earlier, if you take babo, slap in English, in French it's a good joke. It means no good, not nice. This program actually is required for the support that it offers, but I see how difficult it would be. Very hard to support the entire forestry sector entirely. Perhaps you can enlighten me on that. How will this market actually support, in concrete terms, the forestry sector?
The intent of the Softwood Lumber Action Plan on the labour market side was to ensure, first, that workers had access to skills training, totally recognizing the challenge experienced by an older worker used to working in a particular sector, but wanting to make sure that those who do want to transition and acquire new skills have the opportunity to do so. As my colleague mentioned, the funding was offered to the provinces and territories. Those that wanted to take advantage of it could do so. And some chose to do it, and others felt that they had the resources that they needed and did not need any additional support. The other component, which was the special work sharing agreement, was really intended to ensure that employers and employees had the flexibility that they needed to make arrangements such that they did not necessarily have to lay off the workers, but could keep them on part-time and be supported by employment insurance for the day that they were not working.
Je comprends un peu plus pour le second volet, peut-être un peu moins pour le...
I can understand it for the second phase, but the first phase is a social program, just like any other social support program. People who are transiting from across the marketplace, labor marketplace, whether it's long-term or short-term. Towards the end of your presentation, you indicated, or you said, that the program was also targeted at developing what might occur in the forestry sector, sort of forecasting, knowing the temper of the times in that sector today and the automation, mechanization of the sector. Do you have any data, any statistics on that? What might automation represent in terms of lost jobs, and what kind of challenges will it place for those who have to transit because their skills are not necessarily comparable?
Forecasts that are specific to the effect of automation on the forestry sector. We do have a variety of expert opinions and studies that have been done on the effect of automation, broadly speaking, for the economy. And really what does underline is that there is, first of all, a wide range of potential outcomes. In many cases, we see automation leading to more jobs rather than fewer because of the types of new opportunities that automation might create. In other cases, particularly for lower skilled work, there's a concern that automation might in fact replace that employment. And so I think it's likely that we will see some of these effects playing out, but it's difficult to say with a lot of precision how fast and how deep those will be. What I can tell you is that our programming is intended to ensure that Canadians in all sectors, in all parts of the country, have access to the ability to obtain the skills that will make them more resilient to the coming of greater introduction of automation. So digital skills, better essential skills, and skills that are much more difficult to replace with automation, such as creativity and judgment. And I think by ensuring that these are available to Canadians, we can help them be ready. So that if and when automation does become a broader part of their life and is integrated more into business processes, they will have the skills to adapt.
Est-ce qu'il me reste un peu de temps? Une minute? Je comprends très bien.
Yes, I can appreciate the orientation of this program. However, people who will be looking to upskill, get new skills, might end up apply them in some other sectors of work, but not necessarily in forestry. To my mind, this is a social program, as other support programs. It's essential, and I'm not criticizing at all its significance or its importance. But I'm kind of surprised to see that we're using this program to try to patch up a crisis which is much broader than this simply in the forestry sector. It deals with this international trade issues here. The whole social fabric is at risk here or in crisis. But just an observation. But perhaps in closing, quite quickly, do you have any data on participation rates on these programs, or who might in fact be reskilled and then get back into the forestry area?
Have any hard data on participation rate. As my colleague mentioned, many of these programs are delivered by the provinces. We do have access to the reporting that they provide us, and we can work with them to get better information in the future, but we don't necessarily have that information right today.
Thank you very much.
Merci.
Mr. Cannings, you are last up.
Okay, thank you for being here. I just want to start off by, the forest sector has changed, especially the labor relations within the forest sector has changed a lot in the last 20, 30 years or more. It used to be most of the workers were employees of companies, and now, if Weyerhaeuser wants to harvest a cut block, they contract out someone to build the road into that cut block. That person contracts out to someone else to actually put the tape out on the road. They contract someone else to go out and cut the trees on the road, contract someone else to actually build the road. And that's even before they get down to, harvesting the timber. So you have, it would seem to me that the bulk of the workers in the forest, the people out on the land, which I think is probably quarter to a third of the people working in the forest sector in BC, they are self-employed, basically. They're contractors. And I just wondered how much of these funds are available to people like that, some guy that just goes out and does things as a subcontractor to somebody else. Or do they have the same access to those funds that someone who works in a mill does? And how much uptake are you getting from that kind of worker?
Thank you for the question. So eligibility will vary depending on the program. Employment insurance regular benefits are not available to the self-employed. So anyone who is self-employed does not have access to the income support. However, and my colleague can add more details on this, the workforce development agreements are in fact intended for people who are not eligible for employment insurance. And so those agreements provide the provinces and territories with very vast flexibility in terms of who they can serve. And we know that many of them are serving people who are contractors or self-employed. Did you have anything to add?
Yes, thank you. Under both of the large agreements that we spoke about, individuals can present themselves to the provinces or territories and would have access to whatever programs that the different jurisdictions had made available. The only, out of the measures that we've spoken about here, I think the only one that would not be applicable to the self-employed would be work sharing, because there wouldn't necessarily be an employer and an employee relationship. But everything else that we've spoken about would be accessible to the self-employed, whether they were eligible for employment insurance or whether they were not.
So would that include funding to, feed their family type of thing, or is it more on the retraining and things like that?
Depending on the nature of the program set up by the jurisdiction, it could include income support while the individual was on training, so that they could continue to do the types of things that you're talking about, pay their bills while they were receiving skills training.
But if they were just interested in staying alive while this crisis unfolded, they may not be able to be eligible for any extra supports.
As I said, someone who is in a self-employed work arrangement is not eligible for the income support side of employment insurance. However, as my colleague mentioned, there are opportunities for provinces to design interventions that provide people in those situations with income support while they're doing something else to make themselves more employable. That can include training, upskilling, or job replacement partnerships where the province, for example, might pay a portion of the person's salary while they're learning a new job working for an employer. So there is no passive income support, but there are definitely opportunities for active income support.
Okay, and you mentioned that there wasn't much uptake in the initial year or two of this program because, lumber was over $600 and everybody was surviving quite well. But in the last year, things have changed dramatically. As many people have mentioned, a lot of mills have closed, particularly in British Columbia. And I'm just wondering if you have any statistics or figures on how the uptake from British Columbia has been during that, say, in the last year. Because when I talk to British Columbia government people, the sense I get is they feel the federal government isn't helping as much as they'd want to see them help. They have their own fund that they reluctantly to put up. They took it from another rural fund, which was very unpopular, and I get the feeling that they would like to see much more support from the federal government in terms of supporting workers and communities. And maybe the communities part is beyond your domain, but just wondering if you have a sense of what the federal government has provided in extra funds to British Columbia in the last year.
I think probably the best way to answer that is we're watching very closely to see what the uptake was over the course of we saw what would happen in the second year of the program. But I think one of the most important things to point to is that even beyond the softwood lumber action plan is just the sheer scale of the labor market agreements that are in place with provinces and territories. So, for example, this year alone, British Columbia will be receiving over $302 million under its labor market development program, and a similarly large figure under the workforce development program, which I'm looking for right now. But what we found is that provinces and territories often have resources that they can draw on in addition to these. So although these are targeted measures, there's nothing to prevent the province or territory from drawing on that much larger source of funding that they receive year after year from the federal government.
And just
Mr. Kenning, Hate to do it, but I have to
Okay,
stop you.
thank you.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Thank you very much for joining us today. Very interesting and incredibly helpful. So we're most grateful. So let's suspend for 2 minutes. Then we're going to come back and go into committee business.